Hey, it's me, Daniel, again. I was able to find someone to film me. I have two corrections to make. One of them is that Lila, Rocket's girlfriend, and the last review I did, is actually an otter, not a fox. I was wrong for saying that, and I need to correct that. Also, on my first video, I said I was going to review Batman number 66, but I'm reviewing Detective Comics number 66, which is the first appearance of Two-Face. Now, Two-Face has kind of an odd history, and that he was made in 1941 by actually the same guys that created Batman. Bill Finger, though, was the writer on the Two-Face comic, and Bob Kane was the artist, and it was the reverse of that on the first appearance of Batman. And so, but then in 1958, I believe it was, the Comics Code Authority and DC executives decided that Two-Face was too inappropriate for kids, and so they banned him from comics. And he wasn't back as a regular in comics till the 70s, but he did appear in a comic in 1968. And it's because of this that he was not on the Adam West Batman show. So yeah, I wanted to give all that information. I think also one of the reasons they created him is because most of his villains at that point were unsympathetic, and they wanted a sympathetic villain. So let's dig into Detective Comics number 66 and see what the first appearance of Two-Face was like.
First, let's talk about this cover. Well, it's more like a title page because the actual cover of this comic was tied in with the other story that was in it. That's how it worked. There was a Batman story and then something else. Anyway, it shows this guy, Two-Face, and you can see he has a green hand. And funnily enough, he's reading Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Correction on the people that made this that are dead now. The actual name of the novel was The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and although Robert Louis Stevenson, of course, is the author, that's actually a favorite book of mine, by the way, and I really like the book more than any American version of it, which mostly ignores the book. Not that that has anything to do with this comic. And so, yeah, the way that they hide Two-Face's deformed face is pretty good. And then you see Batman and Robin there, and I'm going to just skip the narration, though, because that'll save time. And we cut to this scene where, some reason, they call him Kent. Yeah, instead of Dent, it's Kent. Probably because of Superman being popular at the time, they just made him Kent. It's kind of weird in a way that they did that, but it's kind of mistakes they made. Not only that, there's actually an old 60s Stan Lee or a Hulk comic where he accidentally put that Betty Brant was in the comic instead of Betty Ross. Pretty big mistake since Betty Brant is a Spider-Man love interest. Anyway, people are talking about here the District Attorney Harvey Kent, it says, and someone's taking his picture. Then we have Harvey Kent talking about this case, and they actually put Batman on the stand. Wow, it seems kind of funny that it was like that. Batman was actually pretty violent and often did take the law into his own hands back then. And I'm not sure legally he wouldn't be considered like, a lawbreaker, but whatever. And so Batman's on the stand and testifying. But then, unfortunately, this mobster ends up throwing acid at Dent, and Batman's able to block some of it, but it damages his face. Then, as you see there, he gets given a mirror, and he says, "My face! The acid has left one side scarred and hideous." And then they mention plastic surgery, and I have to admit, until reading this comic, I did not know that plastic surgery existed as far back as 1941. And so, Batman, though, because he's also Bruce Wayne, says he knows of an expert, a Dr. Egghart, the European specialist. And what a coincidence that a guy named with the last name Egghart happened to play Two-Face decades later in The Dark Knight. That's kind of funny. Anyway, and then we have this woman mourning, and she's someone that knows Dr. Egghart, and she tells Batman that Dr. Egghart is visiting Germany and that the Nazis have put him into a concentration camp. And Batman responds, "The devils!" Anyway, enough of the depressing thing. And so Harvey Kent, I'm going to just call him that even though it's an error, ends up thinking to himself, "My last chance gone. There's no help for me now." And then in the next scene, he's talking to Batman, and he's asking him for advice on if he should tell his wife about his deformity and show it to her. And then he walks by these people, and one of them says, "Ugh, what a horrible looking man." And the other one says, "Shh, he'll hear you." And then a little girl talks about being frightened by him, and her mother tells her that he won't hurt her, and thinks to herself, a face like that would frighten anybody. And then he goes to his wife, and unfortunately his wife does not like the way he looks. He ends up destroying a stone sculpture of himself, and then he looks at himself in the mirror and comments that he's become a living Jekyll and Hyde. And that's when he decides he should just use a coin to commit good or commit evil. And he actually takes a knife and scars the coin that he has, so that he has a bad side. And so then he decides he is now Two-Face. And so he decides to do good and evil, and there's all these different people talking about him doing good or him doing evil. In fact, it's even mentioned by someone that Two-Face paid the mortgage on his home. And then we cut to him with his henchmen, and he's talking about his next plan, and also explains how he makes his decisions and why he flips a coin to do good or evil. And then we cut to this bus, and then we cut to this scene of a police officer paying his fare to, I guess, get on the bus. Then we cut to Batman and Robin, and they notice that on top of the bus there's some crooks. And then they end up confronting Two-Face. And Batman, of course, is trying to convince him to give up his life of crime, but Two-Face won't budge. And then he ends up trying to kill Batman, and they get into a fight, and then Robin kicks this guy, and yeah, you might notice that Robin looks really young here. I actually kid you not, he was actually about maybe close to 10 or maybe even 11 when he actually started fighting bad guys with Batman. Not kidding. I guess different standards, I guess. Anyway, they end up defeating these guys, but then Batman is believed dead by Two-Face because he knocked him off. But it turns out that, of course, they were able to stop in time and Batman's safe. And so we cut back to Two-Face in his lair, and he gets angry because there's a mirror, and he told his men not to put up mirrors. And then, unfortunately, his man that put up a mirror, he decides whether he'll die or not at the flip of a coin, and the coin lands on bad, so he kills him. Yeah, this is actually pretty dark for a comic back then. Although the Batman comics were darker back then. Batman, like I said, killed people before. And then we cut to Batman and Robin at the morgue where they are looking at the dead body of Two-Face's henchman that he killed. And it gives them a clue to go to, stairs to projection booth. And so they go to the movie theater, and it's kind of funny. It says the latest Superman, and it's kind of funny because he was actually a fairly new character then. It seems kind of funny that in less than a year there'd be a movie about him. But anyway, they're watching, it might even be news footage. I don't know that that's true, but they did do news footage in theaters back then, so I'm going with that. And then the Superman newsreel, or maybe it's a movie, ends up being over, and then there ends up being a message for everybody to stay in their seat. And there's Two-Face. He's telling them that they are to empty their money from their wallets or purses and give it to his men. And then Batman comes in and they end up defeating him and Robin, the henchmen, and then Two-Face manages to escape. And a policeman actually manages to shoot the car that Two-Face is driving, but he does manage to get back to his hideout. But then it turns out Batman is there, and he convinces Kent to try to turn away from it, but he won't. And then he flips a coin and says to him, "We'll decide your fate now," to Batman. And sadly, that's the end of the comic. I probably should have do the next comic, but I think I'd like to leave it there and tell you to pick up this book that I have on it that's called Batman vs. Two-Face. You can probably find it on Amazon to find out what happens next.
This comic is actually pretty good. It does tell a sympathetic tale of a guy that lost everything, and that's kind of why I like Two-Face. He's actually a sympathetic villain, which is why I don't like Tommy Lee Jones' portrayal, which is both goofy and unsympathetic. Anyway, next time we'll be looking at Uncanny X-Men number 161, which is actually the first backstory to how Professor X and Magneto met each other.
Like,
Did you accidentally